Politics should never play a role in the Department of Justice. But recently, in too many circumstances, it has.
That was Todd Blanche during his confirmation hearing last year. So what can we expect tomorrow when he is up for confirmation for the top job at the Justice Department? There is going to be so much material to cover. We'll obviously have lots of questions about his mishandling and cover-up involving the Epstein files, the withholding of millions of documents, the pushing out of documents that revealed the names of victims, their faces, even nude photographs of victims, his terrible mishandling and violation of the law. The court orders that say the Justice Department is in violation of the Epstein Transparency Act. We'll ask him about the many political prosecutions that the justice has brought under his watch, the Comey Seashells cases and the efforts to go after Letitia James, the prosecution's efforts with respect to my colleagues here in the Senate, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, and others for making a video the administration didn't like. There'll be questions about his many conflicts of interest, his holding of cryptocurrencies and the administration's cryptocurrency policy. There will be questions about his violation of his ethical duties, about the pledges he made during his confirmation hearing last year. How do we expect Blanche to respond to all this? Well, the best indicator is by looking at his testimony during the last confirmation hearing. I began my questions asking him about his ethical obligations and whether he still represented Donald Trump as his criminal defense lawyer. Here was the beginning of that line of questioning.
Are you still Donald Trump's lawyer?
I mean, yes, my attorney-client relationship with President Trump remains. Yes, the cases I was representing him on, to the extent that there's anything going on like the appeal in Manhattan, I'm not part of that.
But you're still representing him as you sit here today.
Well, I mean, representing him, there's no active matters. So
correct, but you're still his lawyer.
I have an attorney-client relationship with President Trump.
And since he acknowledged a continuing duty to Donald Trump as his personal criminal defense lawyer, I asked him what that would mean in terms of his ability to represent the Department of Justice in litigation in which he formerly represented the president, which is so clearly a conflict of interest. Here's that line of questioning.
Would you agree that it would be a blatant conflict of interest as his criminal defense lawyer, as someone who has a continuing legal obligation to him as a former client, for you to participate in any of the work of that group as it pertains to the January 6th case that you represented him, or the Mar-a-Lago case where you represent him, or Alvin Bragg's office where you represent him? You would agree that that would be a very blatant conflict of interest?
I don't necessarily agree with that. There will be a conflict of interest potentially, but I quibble with the word blatant. And
okay. Blanche took issue with my use of the word blatant, so let's see if a different word works with him.
But isn't it a clear conflict of interest? You've represented him in these cases. You acknowledge you still have a continuing obligation to him in these cases. How could you possibly oversee an investigation or review of the prosecutors in these cases when you handled them? How is that not the most obvious conflict of interest?
I am not saying I can or I cannot. I'm saying I'm not going to say to you today, Senator, yes, there's a blatant conflict of interest.
So Blanche says he'll consult with the career ethics lawyers at the department. What actually happened after this testimony? Well, the career ethics lawyer, the top lawyer, was a guy named Joseph Terrell. Terrell reportedly told Blanche, of course you can't get involved in matters in which you had represented the president personally prior to your position in the Justice Department. So guess what happened next? They fired Terrell. They fired the ethics lawyer that told him he had to recuse himself. So has he recused himself? Well, apparently not. He's been deeply involved in, for example, firing scores of prosecutors and FBI agents who worked on investigations of the president, the January 6th investigations, the Mar-a-Lago investigations. He's been actively involved in purging the department of those lawyers. And of course, he was also deeply involved in and bragging about the pardons and commutations of all the January 6th insurrectionists, including people who beat police officers and gouged them and bear sprayed them. Here's Todd Blanche at a conference bragging about how much he and the department have done to let these criminals off the hook. Here he is.
If you look at what happened to the men and women convicted because of January 6th, by 5 p.m. on January 20th, every one of them was either pardoned or had their sentence commuted.
So when I asked him very particularly about whether he'd involved himself in January 6 cases or Mar-a-Lago cases or the case brought by Alvin Bragg, and he went on to involve himself in all of those matters, he was just lying to the committee. Here's that portion of the testimony.
Well, let me just ask you with great specificity, will you recuse yourself from overseeing the January 6th case, the Mar-a-Lago case, and the Alvin Bragg case? Will you recuse yourself from the working group's supervision of those investigations?
I will follow the rules as told to me by the experts, career prosecutors in the department.
In fact, far from recusing himself, he was involved in vacating the convictions of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, the leaders of those two white nationalist groups. He also had the department remove all of the press releases from its website when prosecutors had properly put out press about the conviction of these violent offenders. And finally, he was involved in that $1.776 billion slush fund that was primarily going to go to reward these people that committed heinous acts of violence on behalf of Donald Trump in, yes, that same case that Todd Blanche represented Donald Trump. You couldn't have a more clear violation of ethics, as well as his commitment to the committee during his testimony last year. Now, there's a lot we don't know about what he's done at the department, including whether he has destroyed any evidence. I asked him during his hearing last year whether he would commit to preserving the evidence in the Mar-a-Lago investigation, which he has refused to make public. That is, there is a volume 2 of Mueller's report that deals with Trump taking all those classified documents to Mar-a-Lago. You remember the photos like this one, all boxes in his bathroom of classified documents, the obstruction of that investigation. And I asked him whether he'd make that report public, and here was his answer.
Let me ask you very specifically about the Mar-a-Lago case. The Justice Department formally had recommended Volume 2 be made public. Do you support Volume 2 of the report being made public?
No.
Okay. Do you commit to preserving the evidence in both those investigations?
I commit for sure to following the law and following the rule.
I then asked, well, will you at least commit not to destroying any of the evidence? And here was his answer there.
But you won't commit to preserving the evidence. Let's say you have the discretion about destroying the evidence. Do you commit today to preserving the evidence in both those cases?
I commit to following the law.
Okay.
And
if you can't commit to preserving the evidence in those cases in which you were the defense lawyer, I think, again, that speaks to the conflict of interest that you have as the president's defense lawyer.
I did not commit to it. I said I would follow the law.
No,
I'm not sure what.
Mr. Blanche, I understand everybody's going to say generically they'll follow the law. But I've asked you a simple question about whether you will preserve evidence, and you can't say yes.
No.
You can't say yes.
He wouldn't even commit to preserving evidence. So what he's done at the Justice Department, well, some of it we know of, and it's awful, but a lot of it we don't know of, and we will only learn in the future when the control of Congress changes and we're able to subpoena documents and do an investigation into what's really gone on in these years in the Justice Department. In addition to firing all these people that worked on the January 6th investigation, prosecutors and FBI agents, they also went after the people who investigated and prosecuted the Mar-a-Lago case. Again, the case that Todd Blanche was on the other side of when he represented Donald Trump. Here's Blanche bragging about those terminations.
How many have been canned?
Over 200. Over 200 either left before we came in because they knew it was coming or were fired or took early retirement. They are no longer employed by this department. And when it comes to the FBI, which takes a lot of criticism, especially because of what happened over the past several years, Director Patel has cleaned house there too.
During Blanche's watch, 16,000 people have left the department. Many of them because they wouldn't do the unethical, unlawful things they were being asked of their supervisors under leadership like that of Todd Blanche. Now, when I sat down with him before his last confirmation hearing, I told him that I knew many people from the Southern District of New York who thought highly of him when he had been a prosecutor in that office. I'd been an assistant U.S. attorney in Los Angeles. He'd been one in New York. It's a small network of prosecutors and former prosecutors. I told him I had no doubt that he could do the job, that he had enough of a legal background experience to do the job. The question I had was, what would he do the first time he was asked to do something unethical or immoral or unlawful? And his answer was the same I would then hear from a great many others who I would ask a similar question to, and that was, I don't think I'll ever be put in that position. Well, I told him then that it was not a question of whether he would be put in that position, only how long it would take. And to imagine Todd Blanche going from a respected prosecutor in the Southern District of New York to someone who, as a deputy attorney general, could say this.
We have thousands of ongoing investigations and prosecutions going on in this country right now. And it is true that some of them involve men, women, and entities that the president in the past has had issues with and that believe should be investigated. That is his right, and indeed it is his duty to do that.
To actually say that the president has a right and a duty to go after his political opponents using the Justice Department, that would be unthinkable for any legitimate prosecutor to take that kind of position. It certainly would be unthinkable after Watergate, when we tried to strengthen the independence of the Justice Department from interference by the White House. But not for Todd Blanche. In his view, the president has every right to go after his enemies, and Todd Blanche, ever the dutiful criminal defense lawyer for Donald Trump, is willing to help Donald Trump do exactly that. In fact, if you want to know how far Todd Blanche is willing to go to debase himself in the eyes of Donald Trump, just look at this.
I love working for President Trump. It's the greatest honor of a lifetime. And if President Trump chooses to keep me as acting, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate me, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and I go back to being the DAG, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir.
That's right. I love you, Donald Trump, professing his love for the president in order to get the job of Attorney General. How could we expect someone like that to have any of the character, substance, backbone, conviction to refuse unethical demands of Donald Trump? We just can't.
I love you, sir. I love you, sir. I love you, sir. I love you, sir. I love you, sir.
So we're going to need a lot more help sucking up to us, because that's what we really like. You understand me?
Sir, if I may say so, you're in the right store and the right city for that.
Hey everybody, we do these nightly videos to keep you informed of some of the important things happening in the nation's capital. If you have comments, please submit them below, and we're going to do some special videos just to answer your questions. And while you're at it, hit subscribe. Thanks again for watching.